My brother called it a bonding trip. I called it the worst week of my life, and also somehow the one that finally set me free. We were driving to Sedona, 5 of us crammed into my brother's rented SUV, him, his fiancée, 2 of her college friends, and me. I'd been invited 3 weeks before the trip, which I later realized wasn't an invitation so much as a last-minute fill-in, because the 5th person had dropped out and they needed someone to split the gas money. I didn't know that then. I just packed my bag and felt grateful to be included. That feeling lasted about 4 hours into the drive. My brother and I grew up closer, at least I thought we did. He's 3 years older than me, always the one who knew how to take up space in a room. Loud laugh, big plans, the kind of person who walks into a party and leaves with 3 new friends. I was the quieter one, the one who remembered birthdays and helped our parents move furniture, and showed up when things got hard. We complimented each other, I used to say. Now I think I just convinced myself that was true, because the alternative was too painful to sit with. His fiancée's name is Kirsten. She's fine. Pleasant in the way that people are pleasant when they're performing pleasantness. She always asked about my job with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, always laughed a half-second too late at jokes. I never said anything because she made my brother happy, and for a long time, that was enough for me. Her friends were Bree and Tatum. I didn't know them. I'd never met them before we loaded luggage into the back of that SUV at 6 in the morning. They hugged each other like reuniting after years apart, and when Kirsten introduced me, she said, "And this is my fiancé's sister, not my name, just my function." Bree said fun with that flat, polite effect that means the opposite. Tatum was already on her phone. I told myself it would get better once we got there. The drive to Sedona from where we were was about 7 hours with stops. I sat in the 3rd row with our bags because the other 4 filled the front naturally, and no one offered to rotate. I watched the landscape shift from flat scrubland to red rock formations through the window and tried to feel the excitement I'd had when I first said yes to this trip. We stopped at a diner outside Flagstaff for lunch. I ordered a grilled cheese and coffee. Kirsten and Bree ordered salads, and then spent 10 minutes discussing the dressing options like a philosophy seminar. My brother watched them with this expression he gets, this soft, indulgent look, and didn't once turn to include me in the conversation. Tatum scrolled Instagram and showed the group a reel about a hiking trail near Sedona. Everyone leaned in to look. No one showed me. I told myself it was just a rough start. We got to the rental house around 4 in the afternoon. It was beautiful, one of those modern desert homes with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private hot tub and a view of the red rocks that looked like someone had painted it. 3 bedrooms. I'd assumed I'd share with my brother and Kirsten, since they were the couple. Instead, Kirsten announced that she and my brother would take the master. Bree and Tatum would take the 2nd room, and the pull-out in the living room is supposed to be really comfortable. She said it without hesitation, without asking, like it had been decided before we left. I pulled out the couch that night and lay on the thin mattress, listening to them laugh on the back patio, and told myself it was fine. It was just sleeping arrangements. It didn't mean anything. By the 2nd day, I'd stopped telling myself things. They had plans that no one mentioned to me. A Jeep tour Kirsten had booked for the 4 of them. I found out at breakfast when she confirmed the reservation out loud, and my brother said "can't wait," and nobody looked at me. A sunset yoga session at some outdoor studio. Dinner reservations at a place I'd seen was expensive, the kind of place where you need to book weeks in advance. 4 seats. I counted. I counted the seats in my head before I even fully understood what I was counting. I asked my brother that afternoon if I'd been accidentally left off the bookings. We were alone for about 30 seconds in the kitchen while he refilled his water bottle. I kept my voice light. I said something like, "Hey, I noticed the Jeep tour was only for, do you want to see if they have room for one more?" He looked at me with this expression. Not unkind exactly, more like tired. Like I'd asked him to do something that required more from him than he wanted to give. "Kirsten planned this trip for us," he said. "It's kind of our thing. The 5 of us." "I'm part of the 5 of us," I said. "You know what I mean." I didn't push it. I nodded and said sure, no worries. I made myself a sandwich and ate it alone on the living room couch while they took a group photo on the back patio. I heard Kirsten say, "Send that to me immediately," and everyone laughing. That night they came back from dinner a little past 10, smelling like good wine and that specific kind of ease that comes from a long meal where everything felt right. I was already in my makeshift bed with a book. Bree asked if I'd had a nice night, the way you ask someone you've just realized exists. I said yes. She didn't follow up. The next morning, I woke up at 6, couldn't sleep anymore, and walked down to this little coffee shop I'd found on maps that was about 1.5 miles from the house. I needed air. I needed to not be in that living room. The walk was quiet and the coffee was good, and I sat outside and watched the sky go from pink to orange over the rock formations. And I thought, okay, I can still salvage this. When I got back, everyone was up and in a mood I couldn't read. Tense in that way where people are being too careful with their words. My brother was at the kitchen island looking at his phone. Kirsten was in the bedroom with the door closed. Bree and Tatum were doing something at the table that stopped when I walked in. I asked if everything was okay. My brother said we needed to talk. He and Kirsten had apparently had a disagreement the night before about what, I still don't fully know, and Kirsten had told him that my presence was making the trip feel off, that I was creating a weird energy, that she'd planned this as a close group trip, and she felt like she couldn't relax. I stared at him. "She feels like you've been standoffish," he said. He wasn't looking at me, like you're not really trying to connect. I had been eating alone in the living room because no one included me in plans they'd booked for 4 people. I had been sleeping on a pull-out couch. I had spent 3 days essentially invisible in a group that I was supposedly part of, and I was the one with the bad energy. I said that, not all of it, not as clearly as I'm saying it now, but I said something close to it. My voice was shaking. My brother sighed. He said something about how Kirsten had worked really hard on planning this trip, and it wasn't fair to make her feel bad about it. He said maybe I just wasn't a good fit for group travel. He said he thought I'd have a good time, but maybe it just wasn't working. I asked him what he was saying. He suggested, and I want to be precise here because I've replayed this moment many times. He suggested that maybe it would be better for everyone if I headed home early. There was a bus station in town. It was about a 15-minute drive. Kirsten came out of the bedroom then. She didn't say much. She stood near my brother and said, "I don't want anyone to be uncomfortable," in a voice that made it very clear she was talking about herself. I have this thing I do when I'm blindsided. I go very still and very quiet. Not because I'm calm, but because my brain is trying to process something it doesn't have a category for. I went very still. I looked at my brother, this person who I'd driven 12 hours round trip to help move into his first apartment, who I lent money to twice without being asked back, who had sat within a hospital waiting room for 6 hours after our dad's surgery, and I couldn't find the right words. So I went and rolled up my clothes and put them in my bag. He didn't stop me. He offered once to drive me to the bus station. I said I'd call a rideshare. He nodded. Kirsten disappeared back into the bedroom. Bree and Tatum were still at the table. Nobody said goodbye. The rideshare took 20 minutes to arrive. I sat on the front step with my bag and my phone at 31% battery. The driver was a man named I don't remember, something short, and he asked if I was heading on an adventure. I said I was heading home. He said same thing sometimes and left it at that, which was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in 3 days. The bus station was a small one, not much there. A vending machine, a few benches, a woman behind a window who printed my ticket without making eye contact. The next bus to the city wasn't for 4 hours. I sat down and pulled my knees up and looked at my phone until the screen went dark and then just sat there in the quiet. I bought a charger from a drugstore across the street. I had my wallet, which was the one small mercy. I'd kept it in my jacket pocket from the car ride, and it never made it into the luggage. $43 in cash, my debit card, my ID. Enough. I called my mom while the phone charged. She answered on the second ring, the way she always does, and I said, "Hey," and then couldn't say anything else for a moment. She heard it in that one syllable. Mothers do. She asked where I was and I told her and she didn't say anything dramatic. She just said, "Okay, You're going to be okay. Tell me what you need." I told her I needed a bus ticket home. She said she'd send money through Venmo right now and to please eat something. I laughed a little, the kind of laugh that's really just releasing pressure. I bought a sandwich from the drugstore and ate it on the bench and watched a family with a stroller navigate through the station doors and thought about the fact that my brother hadn't texted me. Not once. Not a "you okay?" Not a "let me know you got there." Nothing. I boarded the bus at 2 in the afternoon. Window seat. The seats were the kind that recline a little, but not enough. I put my headphones in and watched Sedona get smaller through the glass. Here's what happened in my head over the next several hours. At first, I was just hurt. The raw, embarrassing kind of hurt that makes you want to cry but also makes you furious at yourself for wanting to cry. I kept replaying the conversation with my brother, his tired expression, the way he'd said Kirsten worked really hard on this trip, like that was a shield he could hold up against everything. Somewhere around the second hour, I started getting angry, not at Kirsten, at my brother. Because Kirsten had been unkind, yes, but she didn't owe me anything. She was a person I barely knew. My brother was the person who had my whole childhood in his memory. He was the person who knew what it had cost me to show up for him again and again, in ways that had never been questioned or requited. He knew all of that, and he'd still sat across from me in that kitchen and told me to find a bus. By the third hour, something shifted. Not peace exactly, more like clarity. I'd been performing a version of myself for a long time, the reliable one. The low-maintenance one. The one who doesn't make it weird. I'd been folding myself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold me, and telling myself that was just what love looked like. That showing up without being asked, without being seen, without being included, that was generosity. That was being the bigger person. But sitting on that bus with Red Rock Country scrolling past the window, I thought, no, that wasn't generosity. That was fear. Fear that if I took up space, if I said I'm also here, I also matter, I'd be too much. That the people I loved would decide I wasn't worth the inconvenience. And my brother had answered that fear, pretty definitively, on a Tuesday morning in a kitchen in Sedona. I got home late that night. My apartment felt strange, the way spaces do when you've been dreading returning to them, and then the return is actually quiet. I set my bag down. I stood in my kitchen. I made tea, the automatic kind of thing your hands do when your brain is still catching up. My phone buzzed. My brother, finally. The text said, "Hope you got home safe. Maybe we can talk when I'm back." Maybe. I read it twice, then I set the phone down and drank my tea. I didn't respond that night. Not because I was being strategic or dramatic. I genuinely didn't know what to say, and I'd spent enough years saying things before I was ready to say them, smoothing things over before I'd actually processed what had happened, because I was so afraid of the silence. I let the silence be. My mom called the next morning. She'd been awake, she said, worrying. I told her the whole story this time, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee I'd actually made properly, not the emergency vending machine kind. She listened without interrupting, which is something she's good at when she's trying hard. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not going to tell you how to feel about your brother, but I want you to know that what you described is not a small thing. What they did is not a small thing." I hadn't expected that. I'd expected her to find the middle. She usually finds the middle. "You've been the one who shows up," she said. "Since you were kids, you've always been the one who keeps showing up, and somewhere along the way, I think we all started taking that for granted, including me. And I'm sorry for my part in that." I held the phone and didn't say anything for a moment. "You don't have to fix this right away," she said. "You don't have to call him and make it okay. You're allowed to let it be what it is for a while." That was the moment, I think. Not the bus, not the kitchen, not his text. That conversation with my mother, that quiet permission to stop fixing things before I'd let myself feel them. That was when something actually shifted. My brother came back from Sedona 4 days later. He texted asking to talk. I said yes, but not immediately. We met at a coffee shop near his apartment 2 weeks after the trip. He looked like he'd been thinking. Good, so had I. He started with, "I know things could have gone differently," which is the kind of sentence people use when they want to acknowledge something without fully naming it. I let him finish. Then I said what I'd spent 2 weeks organizing in my head. I told him I wasn't there to fight. I told him I wasn't going to pretend the trip was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, because it wasn't. It was a choice, and he'd made it clearly, and I'd heard it. I told him I loved him and that I was not prepared to keep operating in a dynamic where I showed up completely and was asked to leave when it was inconvenient. He started to say something about Kirsten. I said her name didn't need to be in this conversation because this wasn't about her. He looked surprised. My brother is used to me accommodating. He's used to me creating the soft landing. I said, I need you to actually see me. Not as your backup, not as your family obligation, not as the person who'll be fine either way. I need you to see me the way I've always seen you. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the coffee shop felt very loud around us. Then he said, I didn't realize how much I'd let that slide. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was honest, and I've learned that honest is sometimes rarer and more valuable than sorry. We're not fixed. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to wrap this up with a neat reconciliation because that's not where we are. We're talking. We're in the slow, uncomfortable work of rebuilding something that requires both of us to behave differently than we have. Some days I think we'll get there. Some days I'm not sure. Both of those things can be true. What I know is this. I drove home from that coffee shop and sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. I thought about all the versions of that trip I'd replayed, the ones where I'd pushed back sooner, or never agreed to go, or handled the bus station differently, or cried in the kitchen instead of just going quiet. I thought about how many times I'd decided that making myself smaller was the same as being gracious. I'm 31 years old. I spent a lot of those years being very, very good at disappearing when people needed room. I was proud of it, actually. I thought it was a virtue. I'm working on understanding that it wasn't. The red rocks in Sedona were beautiful, by the way. I looked them up afterward. The photos people post, the hiking guides, the history of why the color is that specific, impossible orange-red. Iron oxide in the sandstone, apparently. The rust is what makes it gorgeous. There's something in that, I think. I'm still figuring out what. What I know for certain is that I boarded a bus alone with $43 and got home by myself and sat in my kitchen and made tea and let the silence be what it was. And the next morning I got up. And the morning after that, that's the part no one tells you about being left behind. It's not the leaving that changes you, it's the getting up the next morning, and the one after that, and slowly realizing that you've been the one holding yourself together all along, and that you're a lot steadier than you thought. I've thought a lot about why things unfolded the way they did. Not in a bitter way, more like the way you trace a crack in the wall back to where it started, because you want to understand the structure, not just patch over it. My brother didn't become the person who told me to find a bus overnight. Neither did I become the person who quietly packed her bag and left without a scene. These things built slowly, over years of small choices. His, mine, ours. He chose ease over honesty again and again, and I chose accommodation over self-respect again and again, and when those two patterns finally met in a kitchen in Sedona, the result was probably inevitable. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not that he hurt me, but that I had helped build the conditions for it. I had trained the people around me to expect a version of me that didn't push back, didn't take up space, didn't ask to be counted. And then I was surprised when I didn't count me. What I kept coming back to in the weeks after was something my mom said, "You've always been the one who keeps showing up." She meant it as recognition. But I heard it as a question I hadn't asked myself in a long time. Why? Why had I kept showing up in ways that weren't reciprocated and called it love? What was I actually doing? I think the honest answer is that I confused endurance with character. I thought absorbing quietly was the same as being strong. But real strength, the kind that actually holds, isn't about how much you can take without breaking. It's about knowing what you're worth and being willing to say so out loud, even when your voice shakes, even when the person across from you is someone you love. That conversation in the coffee shop with my brother was hard, but I'd prepared for it differently than I'd prepared for difficult conversations before. I didn't go in trying to win or to make him feel guilty. I went in clear. I'd spent 2 weeks getting honest with myself about what I needed, what I was willing to continue, and what I wasn't. That clarity, knowing my own mind before I opened my mouth, changed everything about how I showed up in that room. That's not something I could have done a year ago, maybe not even 6 months ago. And my mom. I think about her a lot too. She could have found the middle, like she usually does. She could have gently suggested I try harder to connect with Kirsten, or reframed what happened as a misunderstanding. Instead, she told me the truth, including the uncomfortable part about her own role. That took something. It modeled for me exactly what I was trying to learn, that you can love someone and still name what went wrong, that honesty and kindness are not opposites. I'm not who I was when I boarded that bus. I don't think I could go back to her even if I tried. She was well-meaning and patient, and she worked so hard to keep everyone comfortable, but she had forgotten to keep herself in that equation. The version of me sitting here now remembers.